exhibition is called In It for the Long Haul. Of course, that's the appropriate title, with 57 artists surveying a 30-plus year career of a curator and artwork professional. So I'm introducing with this Robert Curcio. Robert Curcio of Curcio Projects has been involved in the international contemporary art world since the early 1990s. He formed Curcio Projects in 2001 as an umbrella organization for his various art projects, including curation, exhibition and artist management, PR and media, writing, art fair consulting, gallery development, and advising collectors. He has curated and/or managed well over 30 exhibitions, including Mortality, a survey of contemporary death art with Donald Cuthbert, and numerous exhibitions at LICHTUNDFIRE recently, including When Night Falls, Reshuffle, and Presence with Priska Juszka. Other recent exhibitions include A Days of Roses at Mazuma Keeps, New York, and Tales of Adjusted Desire at Robert Barry Gallery Online. Curcio was a co-founder and co-producer of the Scope art shows and has consulted with the art fairs Asia Contemporary Art Show, Context, Art Southampton, and Pinter Art Fair, I must say, to name a few. He has written for Art Accuse, Art Voices, Art News, Cover, Dart International, Sculpture, Tema Celeste, White Hot Magazine, and Zing magazines. Originally earning a degree from Tyler School of Art and exhibiting for a few years as an artist himself until deciding to stop making art in the early 1990s while as director of Ward's Nasse Gallery in Soho. Many people, I think, remember that. I will be in conversation, moderator feels exaggerated in that setting, but I will be in conversation with Robert. And I'm originally from Germany. I've been living and working in New York City for the past 30-plus years also. I'm the co-founder and director of LICHTUNDFIRE since its inception in 2015 on 175 Rivington Street. Priska Juszka has been working as a gallery director, independent curator, and art consultant since the mid-1990s in New York City and was part of the first NADA, New York Art Dealers Alliance generation from its formation in the early 2000s. At the same time as she was a gallery director in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. Before relocating to New York City, she studied humanities at the Free University in West Berlin from 1985 to 1991. In writing, she's currently developing the concept of the intuitive memoir. We can talk about this another time. And with that, having said this, I would like to introduce Robert Curcio one more time to all of you. And he can start.
Yeah.
I'm interested in, and probably not the only one here, about your beginnings as an artist, actually, not just your career as an artist. What made you decide to become an artist in the first place?
That was just family, especially my dad. He was a weekend painter, but also dealt with, he was a construction estimator, and he always brought home these big blueprints. And I got interested in them, which I first got really interested in architecture. So that's where it all started. But also with my parents, as a kid, we were always going to the museums here. And then when I actually started to get interested in art and architecture when I was like 13 or 14, the only place they knew in the city outside of the museums was on the 57th Street, the galleries there. And that's how it all started. And then from there I got into painting and photography and doing more and more in art, and also in with Neil Jenny. He was a major early influence, as I write in the press release. that his article and interview that came out in '82, I just read it and thought, this is what art should be. It was all on his bad paintings and the beginnings of his big, thick, heavy canvases, and I just loved that. It was painting in a sculpture, or was it a sculpture that was surrounding painting, or that dichotomy got me interested, and that's early on in my own art career as an artist. That's what I was always very much interested in. What's a painting, what's a sculpture, is it really one and the same? And and at the same time, I also started going to the galleries down here in East Village in Soho, and fell in love with Robert Longo's work, all of his constructions and mixing things in. When he would have or somewhere in the exhibit, a list of everybody involved in the fabrication and whatever else, I thought that was completely amazing. And that's exactly when I graduated. My BFA exhibition was a mix of, you couldn't tell what was, you could tell what was a sculpture, what was on the wall, but you couldn't tell what was a piece. I made it purposely integrated as one big installation. That's what I did in school, and then by the time I stopped making art in '92, somewhere around there, I was making kind of paintings on glass that dealt with, I painted hunks of flesh with words, and it was all on a computer flowchart. So it was all about language, the body, following a pattern, the whole post thing of prison and what is a following system, and all that was big in the 80s. And that was the last few pieces that I made.
So that was really conceptual, mixed media, conceptual, yes.
And I did it while I made the paintings as an individual piece. I saw them as part of a greater whole, an installation on a wall, or even on the floor, or something like that.
So that sounds really interesting, for the lack of better kind of, but I mean, my question now to you is, that sounds actually not just interesting, that sounds, I want to know more about it. I want to know this artist, Robert Curcio, but something must have changed your mind when it came to pursuing your career, or maybe it wasn't just one thing, maybe a few things.
Well, it was kind of a basic, out of necessity sort of situation. When I was still making art, I became director of Ward Massey, where I was organizing around 5 exhibits a year that had 20 or more artists in them. So I've always liked doing big exhibitions. But because it was a small nonprofit organization, not only was I curating, I was doing all the press, any sales, doing all the writing, doing all the installing, taking care of if the toilet broke. So it got to be the situation where I was putting in 10, 12 days at Ward Massey, and then I would go home and maybe start painting at 10 o'clock at night for a few hours, and I just, and then I forgot whether it was one of my own exhibits or I was just out at an opening, and I had no idea who I was talking to or how to talk to them. I couldn't remember if this is an artist that I want to put in one of my shows at Ward Massey, or is this somebody who I should be talking about my work? So I was getting very confused, and health wasn't doing any better. And then I just made the decision that I wasn't going to, I guess you could say it's my Marcel Duchamp move that I'm not going to make art anymore, which I look at making exhibitions and doing everything as part of an installation and performance.
Mm-hmm. So it was almost more ephemeral.
Yes.
Or it was sort of like, almost like a, ephemeral, but also that there was like maybe a performance, a performative element also within what you meant. You mentioned performance before.
Yeah.
Also. Yeah. Many artists who switched from being an artist to either owning a gallery or running a space, co-running a space, how often they still try to juggle both.
Well, Xavier Ellis in the exhibit, I met him because he's a gallerist. And he's always doing art fairs and always organizing things. And then I was telling him, I'm putting together this show and this is what I'm doing. And he was like, I'm an artist. And I was like, I have no idea. I only know you from art fairs and I bought a piece from you and just... And he was like, oh yeah, just go down to the other side of the art fair and go to this gallery. They have my work. Take a look. And I was like, oh. So I went, took a look. I liked it and I was like, can I have a piece? And he was like, yes.
So you worked for many spaces before you then opened up your own space, right? I mean, because at Rodnasse you were in the late 80s, but then your own space was more in the late 90s,
Well,
right?
in the mid-90s.
Mid-90s, yes. Anybody knows it? I mean, like you were there, yes.
Pam knows it. I
Yes.
exhibited Pam a few times.
Right.
And actually, William Graff, who I didn't exhibit at my space, him and I were in our first exhibits in New York City in '89, which was at Rodnasse. That's how him and I know each other and started from there.
So you opened, I understand that you worked for several places in very different capacities. Today you mentioned even Bonnie Von Ruby, not a long thing, not like a mainstay of you working in a gallery, but still, of course, also gallery people know. But you decided to open up your own space. How did that come about?
Well, my ex-business partner was working with this artist who I thought was a very good sculptor. He just said, do you want to open up a gallery? And I was like, yeah, sure, why not?
But you had the gallery together for the time being you had a gallery, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was nearly 3 years.
So that, well, no, actually, I don't want to know first what happened, why you didn't continue, but more, what did you do in the gallery? I mean, like, what was your program, if you had any? Or I mean, like, do you have like some kind of vision or kind of goal set?
Well, at first it was just about doing it and putting things together and reaching out to new artists. Because I didn't use too many artists from Rodnasse or other projects that I did in terms of exhibiting there, and it was just basic to keep the doors open and try to sell art and make things happen. Unfortunately, it was a little, it got to be more and more difficult each year because then. The meat market and all the galleries there took off, and then Chelsea started, and I would be contacting all the writers and curators and critics that live down here and in the East Village and around the block from the gallery saying, yeah, come on, check out the exhibit that we have. And they'd be like, oh, no, we're going to Chelsea or the meat market, and I'd be like, you're around the block, I'll buy you lunch, come on.
Yeah, the meat market was really hot at that time.
Yeah.
Yeah. I must ask you, how come you closed the gallery? Or is that a sensitive kind of...
No, the usual reasons.
Yeah.
Lack of sales, lack of backing, lack of commitment.
Which is actually not surprising at all. I wrote a little bit, like I said, to Robert, well, you know, like I would like to talk about this and that, and then the whole thing that, you know, having a space, a small space, no matter, you could have had it in the East Village, in the meat market, in Chelsea or elsewhere. I mean, it wouldn't have made a difference. Most small spaces really close within the first 3 years, and if not within the first 3 years, then the first 5 years.
6.
Yeah, that's kind of really statistics.
I will say that when I had the gallery, ArtNet just started. And I was one of the first galleries on ArtNet. And it actually worked out very well that I met a client that I worked with for a few years who I never met. We would just go back and forth by email or over the phone. I would send him a box of small pieces. He would say, I like these two. I had his credit card information, and then he would just mail me back the other pieces that he didn't want. And then, so that was every few months I made a couple of $1,000.
Amazing. That's not that happen now either.
Well, it still happens now, but
yeah.
You know, yeah, that was only one story out of 30 years that I can tell you about. That was that easy and simple and never met the person. I never had to worry about a check being missed or something like that. Again, I'm more interested in the art and doing things. If I just wanted to sell stuff, I wouldn't be organizing shows and doing all sorts of things. I would just be selling art, and that's it. I would be making that decision again, curating or just selling, and there wouldn't be any curating or writing or whatever else.
Right. Right, you would go into the art business. Yes, yes. That's what you and I have in common. Sometimes to our detriment.
That's great. Yes.
Yes.
And go on to the next sale, and that's it.
Right. Right. So, and then there was 2000. Is that when Scope started, 2000? Or was it 2001?
Well, the first Scope was in 2002.
Okay.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun and a lot of work. And the first one we decided almost immediately, yeah, let's do Miami. Yes,
Scope, everybody knows, of course, Scope, right? Scope Art Fair by now is a whole different animal.
Yes.
Scope Art Fair was like, in the beginning, it was like NADA, in a way. Right. A bunch of dealers, a lot of people who were later at NADA started at Scope. Yes. Yes, and a lot of artists showed there, and curators, and some very young galleries, also alternative spaces, and it was really nice.
Yeah.
So
No,
the first few editions were really good.
Yeah. We wanted to create a whole different scene. We didn't want to create just a marketplace, which is why we always mix things up. And that's why when Nancy Hoffman said, "Oh, wow, could I possibly participate in Scope?" I was like, "Yeah." It was a presentation, and because I thought it was exciting that this gallery that's been around for, by then, what, 40 years or whatever, and just is known to showing Frey and a few other people, that she was like, I want to reach a new audience, a younger audience, and I want to show different artists than what everybody knows that I want. And she actually submitted somebody that was pretty good.
I remember Nicole Clarkspoon did.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, she did one or two.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but that was the idea. At first, we wanted to mix things up so that there would be an independent curator next to a young gallerist, next to a gallery that's been around for 40 years, and some artist projects that was very different from the art fairs that were happening.
Yeah, were there any art fairs like this before? Because I don't even really recall.
I mean, there's the original Armory.
Yeah, but I mean, like, such a young thing, like, well, the original Armory is a whole different thing. No,
Yeah,
but in the 90s?
that was the only one that was happening.
Right.
The original.
Yeah, you mean the Armory in the Chelsea Hotel? No, not in the Chelsea. Gramercy.
Gramercy.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, that was the only one
Right.
at the time, and by the time we started doing scope, they had already become
Right.
established as
Yes.
the
Okay.
Armory.
Yes.
Mhm.
Okay. So they were sort of the because this was a really, I remember the early 2000s were a fun time. You know, all these did then, of course, more and more of these now called satellite fairs emerged. You know, that's how NADA started, of course, too. And NADA spun off like big time, you know, like, and then came Pulse, exactly, etc., etc. But so the first 3 years it felt very genuine. How long were you involved in school?
3 years, 4 years, something like that. I mean, the year before, in terms of organizing and planning it, and then at least 3 or 4 years of actually organizing it, and then a year or two as just an exhibitor.
And how did this come about? Did you meet Alex Hübschmann somewhere?
Mm-hmm. Well, I knew Alex and Peter Ceres from Rare Gallery, and at that point I was just, you know, as people know, I'm always wandering around at the galleries doing some sort of event or a thing like that, and talking to various people about putting something together. And I kept on asking anybody if they wanted to organize a fair with me. And Alex and Peter were the first ones to say yes. Everybody was like, well, Rob, you're always organizing something, so you just go ahead and do it. So that was also why we were able to quickly put together Scope, because I was already asking a bunch of people, and I said, you know, a few months later, okay, we have this fair called Scope. Are you going to participate or not? And everybody said yes, and we just put it together.
And there you had your new job in exhibitors relation.
Yeah.
And that was a job you maintained for like a decade or so, at least, if not longer.
Oh, no,
I mean, up to now, in a way. You
well,
know?
continuously,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And you enjoyed that. I can imagine you enjoyed that kind of aspect of it. Yeah.
Well, yes.
Yeah.
And the whole beginnings of Scope was, like you said, a lot of fun. It was a lot of work, since it was only a couple of us at first running it and things like that.
Right.
So it was good.
And then, obviously you didn't stay with Scope. Scope is still around, you know, of course Scope has changed tremendously. Peter also is not around anymore and hasn't been for a long time, or in a long time. But what happened with your relationship there? Or, I mean, was it your decision to just sort of branch out, do other things?
I mean, I wanted to do other things, and Alexis wanted to turn Scope into a bigger art fair, and that just didn't interest me.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I didn't want to be just dealing with exhibitor relations, because that would have been a situation where I don't know if I would have kept up being a dealer/gallerist sort of person. I don't know. I might have had to make that decision again.
Mm-hmm.
And that time I didn't want to do it.
Right. Yet you kept sort of like at least the path in terms of like dealing with other fairs,
Right.
becoming part with other, I mean, getting involved with other fairs was probably not only business relations, right? Did you do other things too?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
It depends upon the fairs. Fairs have asked me to work on media, or bringing collectors, or other sort of event things, and besides getting exhibitors.
Yeah.
So, and that just rolled into another part of the performance or installation that I'm doing.
Right.
And,
Yeah, I mean, Scoba, for instance, they always had these like incredible sections where they did like great installation art and sculpture, and I mean, that was actually also fun. I remember that. And they made an effort sort of like doing that, and I don't know if you were like the force behind that too? That I don't know.
That was, early on, that was,
Yeah.
again, what we wanted to do, not just have 200 exhibitors putting out all their wares and it just being a pure marketplace.
Right. Yeah. But then there was the other track. You were somewhat affiliated with nurture art.
Well, in the 90s, a friend of mine, another curator, was involved in nurture art, and that's how I got involved. And we were all working together, and because of my experience running Ward Massey and dealing with the board of directors there, I got more involved not only in organizing the exhibits, but also the development of the board and trying to bring something more about. So,
yeah, Nurture Art was a really strong non-profit, even though small, but you know, yeah, and very well known. And yes, yes, and of course you curated Karen in the show here, and you know, and someone else too. I don't know. Only Karen, Karen Marston.
Well,
yes.
Karen's one of the main figures,
Yeah.
and because of her, later on, when I was just on the board, or I wasn't even involved with, on a hands-on way with Nurture Art, but I was still involved, you know, Karen and I were always discussing what to do and what not to do, and you know, I was always helping out with benefits and fundraisers and planning things and whatever else.
Right. And then there was writing.
Right.
Yeah. And that's something you're still doing. You've been doing now for quite a while.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's basically, it's, what is it, art criticism? You also help artists sometimes, right? With essays? Maybe,
yes.
Yeah.
I don't write too many essays, but I do that or help them write their bios or other things, or artist statements and things like that. And I don't think or consider myself a critic, because I'm just writing. I don't, you know, I'm trying to be more immediate and about the experience than delving into a whole art history, didactic, you know, the polemics of the art and how it relates to something that happened in the 1700s. That I leave to the critics and the art historians.
Art writer with an art history degree.
Yeah, that just doesn't interest me, so I stay away from doing that. And as we were talking earlier, writing is a difficult gig, and so I spend only the time that I want to write on artists and exhibits that I want to write about. And actually, Jeff Wright, who's doing the reading on Sunday, when he had Cover Magazine.
That's on the 29th, not this Sunday, yes.
When he had Cover Magazine, he was like, Rob, you want to write something? I need writers, so Jeff gave me my first writing assignments and things. So,
and he is an artist, writer,
yeah,
right?
no, he's more
publisher,
as a writer and
publisher. Yes, yes, yes. Probably many of you know him too. Sure. Yeah. Also an East Villager. Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So that brings us very close to, well, actually there's another thing to it. And you and I, of course, living in the same city and at the same time, this has been also quite a ride, whether you are in the art world or not, in terms of all the happenings at that time. You were in the art world, in the world, or in our times. And so we mentioned the internet bubble that affected, of course, many people, and not just people in the art world, but it affected people greatly in the art world. Because what I remember is people invested crazily in all kinds of rubbish or something even, right? I mean, must say it like this, you know, people are just, they're frantic, there was a frenzy, yeah. And did that affect you? I mean, other than, I mean, you think that closing the gallery had something to do with that? Or?
I mean, maybe if I toughed it out or decided to do something else, maybe, but it really influenced scope. Mm-hmm. Because we were able to attract so many collectors so fast and so prominent collectors too. So that really boosted scope, because we were known not as a place to go see something, but you could buy all sorts of stuff, and people bought.
Which is interesting, because that was after the first internet bubble in a way, you know, because that was after 9/11, when things then slowly picked up again, I guess, and then there was another frenzy, which got us more into what you call the Great Recession. Yes, in 2008. Yeah. And so these ups and downs in the art world, and then some of them also very tragically, you know, by somewhat triggered by 9/11, you know, of course. And also this, I mean, we are kind of used to it in New York, I guess, that there are these like commercial ups and then there are the commercial downs. It doesn't matter what we are doing, you know, here in New York, you know. And then of course 2008 was quite a ride, I think, for pretty much everybody, because it was such a kind of crazy, free fall of things, you know. So and of course the art world very much contracted at that time, or shortly after, and everything.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah. And you were at that time working a lot with the art fairs, right? Is that true?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, just before, just during, the recession. I was working with a lot of fairs and a number of artists.
And that was also total frenzy. Like there was one art fair after the other.
I mean,
yes, senseless art fairs, and then of course most of them had to go away. You know, I mean that was unsustainable, especially then after what happened in 2008. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, but by 2011, things were starting to get stronger and better, and that's in the same way. I started working with more fairs by then, or maybe 2012, something like that, because the economy and the world situation was getting better, so there was more cash available, and people just felt more comfortable traveling, spending, things like that.
Right.
So, but yeah, you could see the big difference in like 2012 as things kept going back to the way they were.
Right. But now it really happened again as it happened before, in terms of, I feel like the art fair frenzy we experienced in the same way. I mean, there is a whole different approach now, I think. I think there may be as many art fairs, but I think they had to kind of like somewhat figure out more how they can be sustainable. But before it was literally, I mean, like with everything else, you know, like people just opened up shop.
Yes.
And, you know, and try to sell anything to anybody, you know, so, and apparently there was an abundance of buyers and participants and, you know, interested people.
The only fair that I know that didn't happen was, I was giving a talk one time, and a group of artists came up and asked me, how did you make Scope happen? Why did you do it? Weren't you scared? And I was like, what are you talking about? We just, knew a bunch of dealers like ourselves and a bunch of collectors, and we knew how to, I had all the media contacts to get us free advertising, and they were like, oh, but didn't you talk to a lawyer? And I was like, why would you want to talk to a lawyer at the beginning of a business? Most people are doing it. It's all about risk management and covering your ass and everything like that. I was like, why talk to a lawyer before you have any real thing?
Right, you decided to put on this show. Someone said, oh my God, Robert put on this show. Does it mean that he's retiring now?
As I had a discussion with someone not too long ago, I don't get the idea of retiring. Why? Why retire to do something that you want to do? If anybody's worried, I have no intention of retiring anytime soon.
This person was genuinely kind of concerned.
No.
Yeah. Yeah.
No. I mean, if anything, I mean, this exhibit wasn't necessarily about academic or anything like that. It was more of, for those of you who don't know, last year I had a bunch of health issues, and the only thing that really made me feel any better was walking around my apartment seeing my own personal collection of, you know, artworks that were gifts or pieces that I bought, or, you know, an artist that I worked with years ago and really loved their work, but they disappeared. But before they disappeared, they left like half the exhibit with me. I had like 6 pieces of them, and they just, you know, disappeared. So I have, yeah, I've been doing this for a damn long time. And then one day you started talking about some sort of legacy exhibit. And I thought that kind of made sense. And I then thought, you know, how to, as I told those of you who were in the exhibit, you know, this is kind of a retrospective of me and my life, but it's also about working together or knowing you guys or whatever. That's what started it all, not me saying, okay, I'm going to go out with one last bang.
We hope not. If so, then this would be only the first bang. Well, on this note, even though I must say, of course, I'm very curious, but you brought that up already. No, the goal is not to retire, and you know you have many plans, even though maybe not concrete plans for the future. But there have also been already questions around the fact that people are thinking maybe there could be another In It for the Long Haul part 2.
Wait a minute.
Longer haul.
Just longer haul. Nice title.
I mean, never say never, but I don't know if I would necessarily. I mean, I could easily do the show again tomorrow, knowing so many artists, and thank you all for participating, those who said yes. I mean, except for a handful of artists, everybody said yes, right off the bat. So knowing, or at least in my contact list, having around 1,000 artists, I could do this again. And, you know, if in a couple of years I do this again and you have twice the amount of space.
Do we need twice as much space? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't want to get too claustrophobic.
But so with this, I think we should at least open it up to a couple of Q&As, if not more. You know, do you guys have anything to ask Robert or to contribute to the conversation? Steve?
So, I'm still trying to understand the world of contemporary art, and from what I've been, well, you're right, but I see here a lot of what I have via a measure of contemporary art. You know, we have conceptual art here, we have multimedia. And I find it very interesting what we've chosen. You know, it's not what we call like a very strict kind of dialogue with the canvas. It's and not that it isn't, but there's a lot of ideas and concepts behind here, if I may. And that's what I think I'm seeing with contemporary conceptual art. I see a tinge of conceptualism, but still, I see a lot of conceptual art where there's no experience with the texture of the surface, which I think is important personally. And I see that everybody here kind of, one way or another, has that romance between the texture of the surface and the medium itself in one way or another. I see a lot of contemporary art where it's so conceptual, it's almost beside the point.
It's so smooth, so shiny, so pretty in a sense. There's no, but I guess being an old-fashioned New Yorker, as we say, there's no dirt to it, so it just doesn't, it's not right.
I congratulate you on that, because it seems like you touched on that. Everything is kind of is a fascinating choice, but you can still lose yourself in the, God forgive me, the technique, the facility.
I think that's very important. Whether you're a master at it and can do amazing things, or you're struggling with it, it's having that technique and that ability and all of that, which I think is very important. But it's also been, I completely contradict myself in the exhibit by having Rick Purdy's piece here, which is he designed an algorithm to create that painting. And right here with the Walter Robinson's piece, which is he just plugged some suggestions into a computer, the AI generated it, and then it went to another computer printer and printed it out.
But we still have texture.
Even visual texture.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Sure.
Yes, Jonathan.
I have a question for you. I agree with the last question about the visual interest as opposed to purely conceptual interest in the show. I think it's an exciting aspect of it. I just wanted you to speak about the theme of the show, the sort of in it for the long haul, because I sort of found, talking to a lot of artists that I knew but I hadn't seen in a long time, that the sort of theme kept coming up of that people who are still decades on making work have not sort of achieved some kind of celestial status where they can make a living off their work, but they're still doing it, in various degrees for the love of it. And I'm curious, you often think about maybe artists doing that, but I want to hear you speak about people like yourself and maybe Curcio who are still working on the other side or other roles in the art world, doing it for the long haul. I'm curious.
Well, like I said, for me, talking to quote-unquote normal people with a 9-to-5 job, I have no understanding of that, and the concept of retirement just, doesn't make sense to me. And that's, in branching out the thinking of this exhibit, I purposely chose people that I knew had been working at it for years, whether they became hugely successful or haven't. That's not the point. It is being like me, you're in it for the long haul, regardless of whether you make $1 million or you only make a penny. And that's what I was looking for. And there were specific people that, as I went through my contacts, that there was more than a few artists that I wanted to have in it, but I was like, I haven't heard from them in like 10 or 20 years, and either I couldn't find them online, or I went to their website, and their website hadn't been changed since 2015. So right then and there, I was like, okay, that's just not going to float, I'm not known as being a terribly ruthless person, but somebody early on asked me who Bob Curcio was, and that was my dad, and in the end, he didn't make the cut.
Again, Stephen is right, there's a certain aesthetic here also, of course. That's Robert Curcio's aesthetic, because in the end you also picked the works. First of all, you pick the artists to work with, long time ago, some of them, and then you pick the particular works for the show. And so whether you did it, you know, consciously or maybe semi-consciously or totally conscientiously, you know, so it tells your story and it shows your aesthetic. And there may be some exceptions or whatever, but the overarching kind of aesthetic is texture. There is, I guess, a lot of mark making and just
it's
you know,
made.
tactile stuff.
Even whether it's the video or the photograph, Simon Johan's photograph, or other things, it's made.
Right. Right. A lot of painting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Any other questions?
What is the range of time that these pieces were produced that are here?
The majority of the work is all within the past few years.
Okay.
There's nothing that I can think of off the top of my head that might be really, you know, from the 90s or something like that. I don't think there's, although Tote's piece, I think, is 95. And so I think that might be the earliest piece in the exhibit, I think.
I think
Which one is that, Rob?
The sculpture in the plexi grid tree.
I have a question. What other curatorial projects are you planning?
Oh, I am doing a kind of portrait show in in Toronto
Nice.
in the spring, and that's what I got at the moment. Yes.
Oh,
I got something for the, as long as we're
by the way,
in for the long haul. We've talked about a lot of things, the neighborhoods that have changed, the way that the art fairs have sort of changed the art market, the pandemic and all these things. So, for a couple of people that have been in it for the long haul, what would you see as the greatest challenge and the greatest opportunity for creativity going ahead for the people that are in for the long haul now?
You can take that one.
it's directed towards you.
There are a lot of opportunities, whether you're starting out or even as a mid-career artist. Art fairs being one of them, specifically now in the last 15 years, artist art fairs are no longer taboo and a shameful thing to do, and it's actually a very good thing to do because an artist will actually get an idea of what being in the business is really like. You know, I always, when I've talked to students, I've always said, go intern at your school's gallery. That's how I started. You'll start to learn and see how the business and the relationships really work and how completely screwy it all is. So I would say artist art fairs is one of the better things. You know, there's a lot going on online, and that's good, bad, there too.
And the ugly.
Yeah. There, you know, again, you gotta, you know, if an artist in this day and age still thinks that they can stay in their studio and play an artist and be discovered and all that, yeah, it happens once every 50
People win
years
the
or
lottery.
10 years. It does happen, but if you're, you know, waiting for your career to happen that way, you've got nobody else to blame except yourself. Because whenever I've done anything or artists ask me, oh, isn't a gallery supposed to do that? I'm like, wait a minute, it's your life, it's your career. If you're gonna blame the gallery, well then, you know, you're gonna blame your dog too at the same time. And that's, you know.
I think that's so true. I think that, I mean, really, now I'm answering it too. I think but that relates to everything you do and whoever you are. You got to take agency. That doesn't mean that you have to be an expert in everything. That doesn't mean that you can do everything. You need help, you know, you need people. You know, you have to somewhat delegate also or outsource, you know, but if you don't take agency of your own destiny or of whatever you want to do, you know, then in the end you only have yourself to blame. And I think this is now more important than ever. Because this, you know, of course there used to be a model that only also applied to very few people where the artist was sort of the prodigy. But this model is definitely obsolete in this world, you know, and everybody expects everybody to kind of just, you know, take agency, I think, no matter what you do, you know, so, and,
you know,
yeah.
well, I'm sure you've done it too, you know. When I was more of a dealer and gallerist, if I went to somebody's studio and I said, you know, how many pieces have you sold in the past 6 months? And they're like, well, I'm not really selling, I just want to paint. I'm like, okay, next person. I mean, yes, it's great that you're in your studio, but if you can't sell your own work or have people interested in your own work, well, it's just going to make my life and job more difficult. Yes, my job as the gallerist is to sell and all that, but you got to get something to work with. And if you don't have anything to work with, why should I work with you?
True. Well,
Anybody else?
anybody, you want to continue?
All right.
I think people want to drink, no matter what.